My name is Nancy. I have a 7 years older brother named Keith. Ever since he was a child, he excelled academically. His performance was top-notch from an early age, and he graduated from prestigious high school and university. Naturally, our parents were very proud of him and often spoke about how Keith is so amazing. Perhaps due to this environment, his personality became warped as he grew up. Always being expected to excel and constantly praised may have caused him to overestimate himself. Upon graduating from university and finding a new job, he decided to leave our family home. When he left, he sarcastically remarked, "I can't bear such a mundane life in this house anymore," with a wry smile. I'll never forget the look on our parents' faces at that moment. With a look that couldn't hide their surprise and a hint of sadness, they said, "In the past, Keith was always cheerful and cherished us." Honestly, I was angry then. I never stood out like my brother in studies or sports, and the high school I attended wasn't super prestigious, but I valued the bond and love of our family. Both my brother and I owe our lives to our parents' support. I wished he felt that too. During my high school years, I realized daily how precious the warmth and love of a family are. Strangely, my brother didn't seem to feel that love. Our parents had watched over us siblings for a long time, pouring endless love onto us. Yet, my brother seemed to see them as ordinary people, and that weighed on my heart. As a child, my brother was like a hero to me. Seeing him handle everything perfectly made me want to be like him. He used to care about me, play with me, and help me study. However, he changed. By the time I was about to graduate high school, he began to say things like, "Do you really need higher education? And you're wasting your time on such things." Whenever our parents confronted him about his attitude, he retorted, "I became this way because of you." I cried then, but my parents hugged me and said, "Nancy, you've grown into a truly kind-hearted person." Encouraged by their kindness, I managed to get into a national university and secured a job at my dream company. Since my mother had given birth to me relatively late in life, by the time I started working, my parents were almost 60. By then, my brother was already married, but oddly enough, neither my parents nor I had met his wife. My parents had brought up the idea of inviting him home several times, but he always hesitated, saying, "It's a bit of a consideration to introduce her to our family," and avoided bringing his wife to our house. About half a year has passed since I started my life as a new member of the workforce. Just when I thought I was gradually getting accustomed to my job, an unexpected event occurred. During work hours, when I usually wouldn't receive personal calls, my cell phone displayed an incoming call from my mother. Normally, my mother knows I'm at work, so she wouldn't call. I stepped outside and discreetly answered the phone. My mother's voice was softer than usual. "Hey, are you okay? Are you busy right now?" "No, I'm okay." "What happened?" "The thing is, your father suddenly fell ill." I felt a weight on my chest at those words. I immediately informed my supervisor about the situation, ran to the station to catch a taxi, and hurried to the hospital my mother had told me about. Along the way, I repeatedly hoped and prayed in my mind, wondering how my father was and hoping that he was all right, as I headed to the hospital. When I entered the waiting room, my mother, tears streaming down her face, greeted me. "What happened, Mom?" I sat next to my mother, filled with worry. How did my father, who was fine in the morning, suddenly end up in this condition? Unable to process that question, words poured out of my mouth one after another. After a pause, she quietly said, "Your father has been diagnosed with cancer." Hearing this, I felt as if time had stopped. Why? My surprise and anxiety from deep within spilled out in my voice. My mother took a deep breath and began to speak with sadness. "It's stage 4. The cancer has spread to the bile duct, and they said it's hard to remove it all." After that, my mother couldn't stop her tears, and I choked on my words multiple times as I listened. "So, what treatment will be done next?" I asked my mother, seeking hope. She nodded somberly after a short pause. "After a while, the attending physician came and explained the detailed condition and the treatment. My father's illness had progressed more than expected, and metastasis to other parts had been confirmed. Therefore, even if they operated, there was a significant risk, and they couldn't guarantee success. My mother and I held hands, trying to come to terms with this reality. The doctor's words were matter of fact, making us acutely aware of the harsh reality we faced. Specifically, you can either continue with chemotherapy or choose support in a palliative care ward. Both are crucial choices, so we'd like the family to discuss and decide together. The doctor's calm words resonated in my ears. As I slowly sat down on the sofa in the corner of the waiting room, a silence spread between us. Only the ticking of the clock's second hand seemed to carve through the heavy atmosphere. Seeing tears quietly stream down my mother's face, I pondered how to approach the situation. It was a challenging time to communicate, but necessary procedures had to be followed to move forward. We should include Keith in this conversation. Let's contact him immediately and discuss making a decision together. I suggested it and picked up my smartphone. With a wry smile, my mother confided, "Actually, I've already informed Keith, but he hasn't responded." At that moment, recalling past events and my brother's nature, I had a certain premonition. When he sought help, he'd get extremely upset if he didn't respond quickly. Yet, he tended to run away from situations requiring tough decisions. However, believing that the opinions of the entire family were essential this time, I kept calling him. After more than 10 attempts, I finally heard my brother's slightly irritated voice. "What do you want? Calling me over and over? Brother, do you fully understand Dad's condition? Mom should have informed you in detail. Why haven't you come to the hospital?" My voice was imbued with both urgency and anxiety. After a brief pause, he sighed in seeming annoyance. "Of course I know, but unlike you, I'm swamped with work. Dad's still alive, isn't he? I don't think there's any need to be overly concerned." His words lacked any shred of understanding or empathy, deeply shaking me. "This isn't a joke. We don't know what could happen to Dad at any moment. Have you forgotten how much he's worked for our family? We are here today because of his support." I felt tears threatening to spill. However, without showing any emotion, my brother curtly said, "Now's not the time to be fussing over this. There's no point in discussing further." I'm hanging up and promptly ended the call. Stunned by the exchange, I was at a loss. I couldn't hide my astonishment at my brother's indifference. I knew he lacked a sense of family bond and gratitude, but I never thought he'd grown into such a detached person. When I returned to my mother, a look of concern was evident on her face. "What happened?" she inquired. I replied, "It seems he is quite busy now," avoiding the details. My mother sighed deeply, murmuring, "It would have been comforting if Keith was here." My father chose to spend his final moments in a palliative care ward, and a few months after that decision, he quietly passed away. I informed my brother of this somber news over the phone and conveyed the details of the wake and funeral. However, his response was cold, stating, "I'm busy with work, so I can't attend. Please proceed without me." True to his word, he didn't appear at our father's wake or funeral. It seemed even my mother was shocked by this fact. She probably never imagined her son wouldn't show up for his father's funeral. Both family and acquaintances expressed their surprise and disappointment at his absence. After the funeral, when a moment of quiet settled amongst the family, my mother exhaled deeply, muttering to herself, "He really didn't come." I took her hand and said firmly, "Mom, let's not worry about him anymore. We have to let him walk his path. For now, let's cherish our memories of Dad." My mother tightly squeezed my hand in response. My mother smiled and replied, "Thank you." Unbelievably, the next day, my older brother suddenly appeared at the apartment where we live. When I opened the door, his expression was different from usual, filled with an urgent restlessness. Stepping inside, he demanded without any greeting, "Where is the inheritance father left behind?" Shocked by his demand, I emotionally retorted, "Seriously? Someone who didn't even show up at the funeral, and now you're saying this? At my words, my brother, visibly irritated, snapped, "Kids should stay quiet." The atmosphere became instantly tense. But my mother stepped forward, trying to calm the situation. "Apart from this apartment, your father didn't leave much behind," she explained. "There's no way that's true." My brother retorted, barely concealing his anger. Remaining calm, my mother placed my father's passbook on the table for my brother to see. Flipping through it, it became clear that all the savings our father had were transferred to a different account. "What is this all about?" my brother exclaimed in surprise. Mother replied gently, "Your father had instructed you to move all the money to my account earlier. Also, this apartment's name has been changed, and now it's in my name." My brother, taken aback, was at a loss for words. He merely clicked his tongue in frustration and left. As we watched his departing figure, we were once again filled with admiration and gratitude for our father's foresight and his plan to protect the family. A few months later, my mother suddenly fell ill and was immediately taken to the hospital. It was completely unexpected, and the family was filled with shock and concern. The diagnosis revealed that she had pneumonia, and it was in a more advanced stage than we thought. I remembered her coughing slightly recently. When she had seen a doctor at a small clinic before, she had been diagnosed with a minor cold. We felt relieved at that diagnosis and didn't worry further. However, detailed examinations at a major hospital revealed her condition was much more severe than we thought, and she had only about 3 months to live. Hearing this, I was at a loss for words. I couldn't believe it, especially when she seemed so healthy. As expected, or perhaps tragically, just a few days after the 3-month mark, my mother quietly passed away. The space without her was filled with an indescribable stillness and sorrow. Why didn't I notice sooner? Why didn't I take her to a bigger hospital immediately? Filled with guilt and grief, I shed tears countless times. Even after hearing about my mother's passing, there was no sign of my brother coming to our house. My aunt, my mother's sister, and I handled the arrangements for the wake and the funeral. Understandably, it was a significant shock for my aunt that my brother didn't appear at our mother's last rites, just as he hadn't for our father's. Although my aunt was extremely outraged, I felt that expecting anything or saying anything to my brother was meaningless after recalling his past actions. However, a few days after the funeral, as my aunt and I were sorting out the heirlooms, my brother appeared again, accompanied by his wife, whom we were meeting for the first time. "Where's Mom's inheritance? She must have left something, right?" From the get-go, that's what my brother brought up. I was both shocked and dumbfounded. My aunt, equally stunned, stared at him in disbelief. And the most astonishing thing was that beside my brother stood his wife, my new sister-in-law, who neither met our eyes nor greeted us. She just stood silently next to my brother. Even more shocking was that my brother did not even visit our mother's grave. "Brother, please, at least pay your respects to our parents. At the very least, visit Mom's grave," I said calmly. With a sneering laugh, my brother responded, "Does that even mean anything?" He then quickly followed with, "By the way, how much of Mom's inheritance is left?" At that moment, my aunt's expression changed drastically. In a voice filled with anger, contrasting with her usual warmth, she sternly admonished, "Keith, how can you think of such things at a time like this? Nancy is managing the funeral on behalf of both of you, putting in all her effort. Shouldn't you act with a bit of gratitude, thinking of your parents?" However, my brother completely ignored our aunt's anger, responding dismissively, "Auntie, it's none of your business. Don't interfere." Suddenly, with the demands made by my brother and sister-in-law, the atmosphere in the room became cold and tense. From behind my brother, my smiling sister-in-law said, "Of course. I remember your name, Nancy. Do you plan to keep all of your mother's inheritance for yourself?" "Sorry, but we can't allow that. This apartment is so lovely, I think it's perfect for us." I never imagined that my brother and his wife would say such things. "Why should I have to leave for the sake of both of you?" I asked, my voice quivering. While twirling her finger, my sister-in-law continued, "This apartment has just been renovated, and its location is amazing. It's close to the station and there are plenty of shops. So, we'll be living here." I was at the peak of my anger. "Big brother, all you care about is the inheritance. What are you thinking?" I couldn't hold back and raised my voice. Turning away, my brother let out a heavy sigh. "Such vulgar behavior. Do you think raising your voice solves everything? We'll be back here in 3 days. Have everything ready to move out by then." With those words, their intentions became crystal clear. A mix of my anger and sadness bubbled up, and I couldn't stop my tears from flowing. But this wasn't just a one-time event. I had to think about what to do next. Determined, I wiped my tears. My aunt gently tapped my shoulder and handed me a letter. The delicate handwriting of my mother adorned the envelope's surface. "What's this, Auntie?" I asked, carefully opening the envelope. "Your mother entrusted this to me for a just-in-case scenario. She told me to give it to you at the right moment," my aunt said, tears forming in her eyes. I unfolded the paper inside. My mother's beautiful handwriting filled the page. "To my precious Nancy, if you are reading this letter, it means I'm no longer in this world. I'm truly sorry for our sudden parting." I felt warmth in the back of my eyes, tears beginning to flow. "You might have Keith visit the house concerning the inheritance. But don't worry. Everything that your father handed down to me is now yours." I was at a loss for words. I had no idea my mother had thought this far ahead and prepared everything in advance. "I'm sorry for suddenly leaving you alone, but I'm at peace, because I've seen how much you've grown into a wonderful person. While learning is essential, it's not everything. The kindness and compassion you learn through your interactions with people is what I believe holds the most value. Your father and I were genuinely happy to see you grow up with such a warm heart until our last days. And words can't express just how proud we are of you. I truly want to express my heartfelt gratitude. Thank you." Overwhelmed, I read on, deeply moved. "Mom." The words before me blurred with my tears, but I was determined to take in every sentiment my mother had conveyed and continued reading. "Actually, after your father passed away, following his wishes, I secretly changed the apartment's ownership to your name. I'm sorry for using your seal without permission, but it was both your father's and my wish. Please don't be angry. Life has its ups and downs. Even when things get tough, we want you to persevere and live your life fully. So, stay strong and find your happiness." The letter ended there. Tears streamed down my face, wetting the paper. My aunt, standing next to me, pressed her eyes and shed tears alongside me. "My sister truly cared about you. In her heart, you were a treasure," my aunt said gently, holding my hand. From the envelope, a bankbook in my name emerged. It seemed like something my mother must have secretly made in the past. To my surprise, when I opened the bankbook, a substantial amount was recorded. I felt that this was probably the inheritance from my father that my mother had saved for me. A few days later, my brother and his wife showed up at the house. Without even knocking on the door, they entered as if it was their own home. "It's time for you to leave, just as promised, right?" my brother sarcastically said. As I stood still, my sister-in-law became irritated. "Isn't it your duty to leave quickly?" she said, almost as a command. For a moment, I felt overwhelmed by the atmosphere, but I took a deep breath, looked them straight in the eyes, and said calmly, "Actually, this house is now under my name." With that statement, the room's atmosphere became tense. My brother and his wife looked at each other, exclaiming, "What? What kind of joke is this? I am the eldest son. I should inherit the house, right?" my brother said, clearly shaken. Beside him, my sister-in-law stared at me, saying, "This is the first I've heard of this." However, I had decided to state the facts. The house and the inheritance are all managed under my name. So, there's nothing to divide. My brother frowned, then handed over half of that inheritance to us. But this money was left for my future and to ensure that I take care of the house. You always looked down on me, and now you're asking for money. What changed? I questioned. His face turned red. Surprisingly, my sister-in-law exclaimed, "Wait, what is this? This isn't what we were expecting." From what I gathered, my brother recently faced significant trouble at his job and was subsequently fired. Not only that, but he and his wife were moving from one day job to another, seemingly in a tight spot financially. They probably had high hopes for my mother's inheritance and the house. But with my revelation, their expectations were shattered and they began bickering, placing blame on one another. Watching their childish dispute, I thought, what can possibly be gained from all this? To them, I said calmly, "This is my house now. If you make any unnecessary fuss, I'll call the police." Trembling with anger, they reluctantly accepted my words and left. Since then, I've had no contact with them. I deliberately deleted all their contact details and began a new life in this apartment. This apartment is my treasure, filled with memories of my father and mother. Now, I have a loving partner by my side. We plan to build a new family in this apartment. He respects my decision and proposed that we take the first step of our new life here. Our future is bright, and I want to pass on the warm love my parents gave me to the children we will have in the future. My name is Lindsay. I'm a 29-year-old company employee, and this year means I'm getting older still. I met Jake, a year older than me, through friends, and we decided to marry 6 months after we started dating. Jake, who made a name for himself in tennis during his student days, is an active person who continues to play tennis even now. As I was in the tennis club during my student days, we immediately found common ground together. Once we started dating, we would often play tennis together on the weekends. One day, after our date, Jake proposed to me and we decided to get married. It's been almost 3 years since we got married. We don't have children, but we bought an apartment after getting married and have been living together ever since. Both of us work, and while we aren't struggling financially, we can't say that we're wealthy either. We're living a happy life. However, something happened between us that shattered my peaceful days. One day, Jake suddenly asked me to come to his parents' house. Surprised, I hurried there to find Jake, his parents, and an unknown woman waiting for me. As I struggled to understand the situation, Jake suddenly knelt down and said, "Lindsay, I'm truly sorry. The truth is, I've been involved with this woman here, Olivia. Last week, we found out that Olivia is pregnant. I feel responsible for her and the baby. So I think it's better that we separate. I'm sorry, but I want a divorce." Jake shocked me with this revelation. Exposed to his infidelity, the pregnancy, and faced with his demands for divorce, I was stunned. That was when my mother-in-law spoke to me. "Lindsay, please forgive Jake. Yes, he cheated, but the problem lies with you too. You and Jake weren't really a good match from the beginning. So, I'm sorry, but please forget about him." And my father-in-law added, "Olivia's father is an executive at a major company. A man in a totally different position from someone like your poor father. I think you know who's more suitable for our son." I couldn't believe it. Jake's father belittled not only me, but also my father too. Normally, parents would put the blame on their son for cheating, but Jake's parents didn't seem to think that way. Instead, they seemed to think it was natural for us to divorce, and that their son had done nothing wrong. I took the divorce papers and said, "I understand what you all want to say. Being with people who have such warped thoughts might affect me too. I'm shocked at how you make it seem like I'm the villain despite Jake's infidelity. Don't worry, I'll file these divorce papers myself. I'll leave the rest to a lawyer." And with that, I quickly left the scene. As I left, my father-in-law mockingly said, "A poor person hiring a lawyer? What a waste of time and money. When she doesn't even have any. She shouldn't bite off more than she can chew." Ha ha ha. Ignoring him, I left his parents' house and immediately went to City Hall to file the divorce papers. At least I was able to end my marriage with Jake. The next day, surprisingly, Jake and Olivia came to my apartment. Seeing me, Jake said, "Oh, you're still here? You haven't even packed your things. You're taking your time, aren't you? Hearing this, Olivia also looked at me curiously. I was furious at Jake's words. What are you talking about? You're the one who should be taking it slow. This is my house, so you should be the one to leave. The movers are coming soon to take all your belongings to your parents' house. If there's anything you don't want them to touch, you should take it now, I retorted. Hearing this, Jake suddenly panicked. What? This is my house. The ownership should be in my name, he exclaimed. I was dumbfounded. After all, this apartment was bought in my name. I had already told Jake about this and about my family's background before we got married. But it seems that Jake is the type to conveniently forget things that don't suit him. Perhaps this carefree nature is why he was easily swayed by Olivia. I showed the deed to the apartment and my name was clearly written on it. Jake's face quickly changed upon seeing it. Meanwhile, Olivia's face began to cloud over with anger. Jake, what is this all about? This is completely different from what you told me before. Were you deceiving me? Olivia began to confront him. This is strange. What's happening? Jake responded in confusion. That's not an answer. Explain yourself. Olivia pressed on. First, this is my house, so please take your argument outside. And just so you know, Jake has various debts. So if you're planning to marry him, be prepared for that burden. I calmly stated the facts to Olivia. Hearing this, Olivia seemed about to say something, but I didn't care and kicked both of them out of the room, slamming the door behind them. After a while, I could hear them arguing outside the door, but it eventually quieted down. About an hour later, the movers finally arrived and took all of Jake's belongings to his parents' house. The room was now clean, and I was relaxing in the newly organized space. But it was short-lived. Suddenly, the intercom rang repeatedly. I cautiously opened the door with the chain lock still on, and my mother-in-law was standing there. Hello, is there something you need? Lindsay, why did you keep such an important thing a secret? What are you talking about? I can't believe it, but Jake just told me that this apartment is in your name and that your parents are the owners of that famous restaurant chain. It seemed Jake finally remembered my family's circumstances. What about it? If I had known, I would never have let this divorce happen. A daughter from such a wealthy family. We would love to have you back in our family. Lindsay, please, reconsider and start over with Jake. I was shocked and at a loss for words at her outrageous request. I couldn't possibly agree to what she was asking. You really have a terrible way of thinking about things. Am I not a human being? Are you only interested in money? I'm sorry, but I don't want anything more to do with you. There's nothing more to talk about, so please leave, I said and attempted to close the door. But my mother-in-law, infuriated by my attitude, raised her voice in anger. Don't be so arrogant. I'm giving you my permission to reconcile your differences. Fix things with him right now. I won't leave this spot until you agree to get back together. Open this door immediately. She said this, pounding on the door repeatedly. I decided that I couldn't handle this alone and called the police. They came and took my mother-in-law away. Even as the officers were taking her, she was shouting something loudly, but I no longer cared to listen to her words. There was a reason why my in-laws were unaware of my family's business background. My father, coming from a poor background since childhood, continued to live modestly, even after becoming a company president. He never considered buying branded clothes. He always took great care of his belongings and used them for a long time. Hence, at our wedding, he wore a suit he had bought decades ago. Seeing this, my in-laws assumed that my father was not financially well off and misunderstood his restaurant chain as a small, privately owned business. As a result, they never delved deeper into my father's business. Time went by without them understanding the true circumstances of my family. Days after managing to send my mother-in-law home, Jake tried to persuade me to reconcile our differences. His persistence was incredibly exhausting. It was surprising how insistent he was, despite the fact that he was the one who proposed the divorce. He seems to have a talent for quickly forgetting inconvenient truths. I opened the door, keeping the chain lock on, and Jake, upon seeing me, began to speak with teary eyes. "Lindsay, please, let's give it another try. Everything is my fault. I'm truly sorry. I still love you. Let's be together again." He then explained a sudden turn of events. Olivia had apparently approached Jake aiming to get his house, pretending to be pregnant to sway him. However, once she learned about Jake's considerable debts, she gave up and fled, and now Jake was coming to me to seek reconciliation. Huh? What are you saying? I don't know anything about that. How can you say that? After you cheated and brought up divorce, now that she's left you, you want to get back together? There's no limit to your audacity. I have no intention of getting back together with you. Don't ever come here again. I refused Jake right there and then. Surprisingly, he quietly left. However, this was not to be their last attempt. Days later, Jake's entire family unexpectedly showed up at my workplace. They were shouting, "Bring out Lindsay. Get that woman out here. We know she's here," causing chaos in the office and leading to the security guards being called. I stood there, dumbfounded by the situation. But they wouldn't have things their way any longer. I worked at the headquarters of my father's company, and that day, my father was also in the office. All of my colleagues also supported me. "Hey, what are you doing? This is my company. Don't just barge in and make a scene. I know everything you did to demean my daughter. Don't ever come near her again, and never set foot in this company again." My usually calm father shouted furiously at my ex-in-laws. Everyone, including the employees and Jake's family, must have been surprised at the anger of my father, who usually only shows his gentle and calm side. Sorry. We're really sorry." Jake's family desperately apologized. My father's stern words had immediately quieted them down. As they were being escorted out by security, my father shouted in a strong voice, "Don't you ever come here again, and never do something like this again. I won't allow it. You understand?" Hearing this, I couldn't stop myself from crying. I felt a deep sense of gratitude that my father had gotten so angry for my sake. Later, through the company's legal advisor, I decided to seek damages from Jake's family. I sought damages for the divorce due to Jake's infidelity, for his persistent attempts at reconciliation after the divorce, and for the disturbance at my workplace. The total amount was substantial, and I eventually received payment from them. I also made them sign a written agreement promising never to come before me again. Jake's family's state of affairs rapidly declined thereafter. Chased by the money owed to me and Jake's existing debts, they ended up selling their home and moving far away. In town, the story spread that Jake had committed adultery, divorced his wife, and after being abandoned by his mistress, attempted to reconcile. Facing such embarrassment, they could no longer stay in this town. While I felt a bit of sympathy for them, I also knew that everything was a consequence of their actions, so it was clearly deserved. Jake's family never appeared before me again. Finally, I was able to resume my peaceful days. However, my father had harsh words for me as well regarding what had happened. He blamed me for not recognizing before the marriage that Jake was a person who would commit adultery and accrue debts. Certainly, while Jake was at fault, my lack of insight was also partly to blame. Unable to argue with my father, I felt disappointed and disillusioned with marriage. I felt that I needed to give my heart a break. However, about a year later, I decided to marry my colleague, Matt. Matt was sincere and earnest in his work, trusted by everyone. I was initially attracted by his personality, but as we started dating, I was also drawn to his lifestyle. His life was surprisingly simple. He never indulged in branded items, used everyday things for a long time, but generously spent money and spoiled me on dates. His behavior was very similar to my father's. My father, who usually saves money, would splurge on family trips, bringing us joy, I deeply loved and respected my father. Realizing Matt's actions were similar to my father's, I felt that I could be happy with him in the future. Therefore, I decided to marry Matt. I was worried about being scolded by my father for remarrying within a year of my divorce, but his reaction was surprisingly positive, probably because he had heard of Matt's reputation at work and knew of his character. There was nothing bad said about Matt, and from my father's perspective as the company president, Matt seemed to be performing exceptionally well. I feel confident that Matt will take good care of you, Lindsay, my father told me happily. Matt and I were happily married. Not long after our marriage, we discovered that I was with a child. The happiest person to hear this news was undoubtedly my father. I was so glad to see my father happy. Reflecting on my time with Jake, where we didn't have children even after 3 years of marriage, it seemed like a stroke of luck. Matt and I plan to take over the company in the future. We are currently learning the basics of management from my father. Although there are many challenges, we accept that they are our responsibility as successors, and we are working hard together. We believe that we will need even more effort for the sake of our upcoming child, despite all that's happened. I am now very happy. Together with my family, we intend to firmly support this company in the future.
Why are you getting in my way? Since I said I'm going to live here, I will. Take everything unnecessary outside and quickly bring in my stuff my mother-in-law ordered. As she loudly declared this outside the store I manage, my husband Sean, who was next to her, simply chuckled. At that moment, a car painted black pulled up with a sound. My name is Shelley, and I am 31 years old. Sean and I got married 4 years ago. His father passed away from an illness when Sean was still young, and his mother raised him alone. Sean graduated from university and got a job in a local manufacturing company. He is kind-hearted and soft-spoken, easily swayed by others, which makes a career advancement among his ambitious colleagues unlikely. I graduated from university and initially worked at a cosmetics company, but I never gave up on my dream of becoming an esthetician. While working, I attended beauty school at night, and after graduating, I trained at a top esthetician's shop. The reason I continued to pursue this dream was that I had always been self-conscious about the shape of my face since I was young, continually receiving hurtful comments about it. However, in high school, while strolling through town with friends, I got a free trial coupon for an aesthetic treatment and decided to try it that day with a friend. The shop was white and clean, filled with a comforting scent. A very beautiful esthetician took care of me. I was instantly captivated by the charm of the place. She listened to my concerns attentively and provided a genuine treatment despite it being free. I will never forget the surprise I felt when I looked in the mirror after the treatment. She said, "It is our job to solve problems and bring out people's confidence." I was moved by her words and felt tears welling up. This experience made me strongly feel that I wanted to help others, which led me to choose this profession. Sean and I met through a friend's introduction, and as we went on several dates, we grew closer and got married after about 2 years of dating. Sean is gentle but weak-willed, which balanced well with my strong personality. At least, that was the case until his mother appeared. When we exchanged greetings for marriage, his mother repeatedly asked us to live with her at her home in the suburbs, which was inconvenient for commuting. We managed to convince her otherwise and started our married life alone. Then, a year ago, I quit the company I was with and was able to open my own aesthetic salon, a dream I had for many years. I used to juggle part-time jobs, but starting my own business has led to days much busier than before, causing more frequent mismatches in the life Sean and I share. Still, we made efforts to maintain our bond as a couple, such as having breakfast together and reporting our homecoming times. One evening, as I returned home late, Sean, who would usually be asleep by then, was waiting for me and began talking with a serious expression. "Shelley, actually, there's something my mother consulted me about." As he spoke, he revealed, "Actually, my mother has accumulated debts, and it's come to the point where she has to sell our family home." I couldn't help but express my surprise. What? His mother had always been reckless with money and led an unplanned life. He further explained that his mother had used the money his father had saved for Sean's tuition, forcing Sean to rely on scholarships for university. This spendthrift behavior was the reason I had adamantly refused to live with her when we were newly married. The sale of her house meant she would have nowhere to live. I felt a heavy sense of unease about this situation. "Hey, can we let my mother live with us?" Sean said. But I quickly interjected before he could finish. "It's impossible. We absolutely cannot live together. I don't mean to speak ill of your mother, but she would end up dipping into our living expenses. Isn't your mother still working? She should rent an apartment with her income and live alone." I appealed strongly to Sean, desperately wanting to avoid living together. It pained me to criticize his mother, but it was unavoidable. "No, actually, there are debts that can't be covered even by selling the family home. So I suggested cutting expenses to allocate more towards debt repayment." Sean replied, "You can't just decide that." "I understand what you're saying, Shelley. I take back what I said earlier, and I'll talk to her about living on her own," he said. But I was skeptical. Sean always seems to accept my opinion in my presence, but he becomes speechless in front of his mother. I was deeply anxious that his mother might eventually force us into living together. Sure enough, the next day, I received a call from his mother. "Shelley, this is terrible. Do you really dislike the idea of living with me that much? I held back when you two first got married, thinking you were both newlyweds, but this time it's unavoidable. I'm about to lose my home. Even if we're not blood related, what kind of cruel daughter-in-law are you to abandon a mother?" My mother-in-law vehemently criticized me. "I'm sorry, but I must oppose it. Our house is too small for even the two of us, so we cannot provide another room," I explained calmly to my mother-in-law, but my calmness only angered her further. It's unacceptable for a wife to go against her husband's words. "I will retrain you to be a proper wife, so be prepared," she said, and abruptly hung up the phone. This was another reason why I refused to live together. I've always struggled with my mother-in-law's domineering personality. It's always frustrating how Sean gets swept up in her assertiveness and becomes submissive. The next day, despite it being early dawn, my mother-in-law showed up at our house. "Sean, Shelley, are you there? I've come to talk, so open up quickly," she called out loudly without using the intercom and banged on the door. Considering the nuisance to the neighbors, I quickly let her inside, but she ignored me and went straight to wake Sean, who was still asleep. "I have to move out of that house by next week. Don't worry about what this daughter-in-law says. Quickly start preparing for my sake," she said, hitting Sean on the back. I wondered how a man over 30 could be treated like this by his mother, but I couldn't just stand by and watch. "Mother, please calm down a bit," I intervened, to which she directed a sharp gaze at me. "How can I calm down? This situation is your fault. It's because of your selfishness," she snapped. Tension filled the air between us. Sean, witnessing the scene, said, "Mom, I'm sorry. I'll figure something out, just wait a little longer," and suddenly began to apologize earnestly. Seeing his pitiable state, I was dumbfounded. However, my mother-in-law seemed somewhat satisfied with his response. "You have one more week. Make sure you sort it out by then, she said that and then left. Sean, why do you act so helplessly? And what exactly do you plan to do? I asked. As I pressed him, Sean visibly became angry. Be quiet, Shelley. Can't you show a bit more understanding? Why am I always the one being blamed? He shouted and then covered his head with a blanket. Sean raising his voice was unheard of, and I began to feel anxious that something unusual might happen this time. And my premonition was right, the situation worsened. The next week, as set by my mother-in-law, she and Sean took an unexpected action. That day, I visited the bank in the morning for my work as a president and planned to head to the store in the afternoon. The store opens in the afternoon, so I had left the preparations to my staff. However, before opening, I received a call from my staff informing me of a serious issue at the store, urging me to come quickly. I changed my plans and hurried to the store. To my surprise, when I arrived, my mother-in-law and Sean were confidently walking around inside. What are you doing? Customers will be arriving soon, so please leave, I said. There were several beds in the store, separated by partitions, but my mother-in-law was lying on the beds and measuring them. What are you talking about? This is a viewing, isn't it? There are beds here, and this room is perfect for me. I don't need all of it, but I will use at least half. It's equipped for privacy and it's discreet, so no worries. But this bed is a bit small. I'll use 2 of them, she said, while arranging 2 beds together by herself. Incredibly, Sean was smiling and agreeing with her plan. Sean, what is this? Moving here is not something I can allow. If this is a joke, stop it right now, I appealed, but I was confused by the unexpected actions of my mother-in-law and Sean. If it becomes public that someone is actually living in the esthetician's store, it could lead to a credibility issue. My store has been highly rated for its emphasis on hygiene. Thanks to this, many customers have supported us. However, I could not allow their selfish actions to threaten that reputation. Please stop this and leave. We are about to start business and we have many reservations. If you continue to stay here, I will call the police, I shouted. Hearing the word police, my mother-in-law and Sean showed a slight disturbance. Let's leave it at this for today. However, I don't have time. I am definitely planning to live here, she declared and left with Sean. I apologized to the staff while quickly tidying up and organizing the store. I had anticipated my mother-in-law being unreasonable, but I did not expect Sean to participate in such actions. I was deeply shocked by this fact. It was clear from Sean's expression that he had decided to side with his mother. That night, Sean did not return home. I wondered if Sean was avoiding me or if he just didn't care what happened anymore. Still, I had to make sure that something like this didn't happen again. So I called Sean. Hello, Sean. Ah, hello. Sean sounded reluctant to speak. Please tell me today's actions of your mother were a joke? If she starts living in the store, it will be ruined instantly. As you know, this store thrives on customer trust. If your mother tries anything strange again, you must stop her. Do you understand? Sean didn't respond to my firm words and hung up the phone. Seeing his reaction, I realized something. Sean couldn't resist his mother's constant pressure and ultimately chose to stand by her. It seemed psychologically easier for him to comply with his mother's demands. He had a problem with dependency on his mother. But this meant that a real crisis was looming for my store. I was deeply troubled. How should I protect the store I love? I spent the night thinking about it, and before I knew it, it was morning. The next day was a day off for my salon, but driven by a bad premonition, I went to the store. As I nervously cleaned, suddenly, a large truck stopped in front of the store. I instinctively sensed something. I rushed outside to see movers beginning to unload furniture and preparing to bring it into the store. When I questioned the workers, indeed, the requester was my mother-in-law, and they were trying to bring her furniture into the store. "Please wait. I cannot accept this here," I firmly protested, but the workers showed no sign of halting their tasks. Naturally, they were just doing their job and had to complete the work they were requested to do. I managed to convince the workers to pause their activities temporarily and hurriedly contacted someone for help. As the workers had other schedules to attend to, they were confused by the interruption and seemed to be contacting my mother-in-law. It appeared that she and Sean would be arriving soon. Eventually, my mother-in-law and Sean appeared. "Why are you interfering with me? Since I said I'm going to live here, I will. Take everything unnecessary outside and quickly bring in my stuff," my mother-in-law commanded. "That's right. Mom is going to live here, starting today," Sean added with a chuckle. Although confused, the workers had to act within the limited time and began following my mother-in-law's orders to move things outside. "Stop doing as you please," I shouted, and just then, a black luxury car stopped behind the truck. A large man, wearing a double-striped suit and a stylish hat, pulled down low, stepped out of the car. His commanding presence was immediately noticeable, and he exuded an aura that was clearly no ordinary. The man approached with a deep voice. "What's all this commotion? Isn't this disturbing the neighborhood? Is this not Shelley? Are you having some trouble?" "Yes, I am having trouble with people trying to take over my shop and live here," I responded. Hearing this, the man looked towards my mother-in-law and Sean and calmly asked, "It seems there is some sort of trouble here. Is there a reason for this?" Overwhelmed by the man's presence, my mother-in-law mustered the courage to retort, "What are you talking about? Don't meddle in family matters. This woman is my daughter-in-law, so what's the problem with moving into her house?" At that moment, the man gently removed his hat and said, "I see. That's what this is about. My daughter has always been well taken care of by you. I hear about it often." "Sean, it's been a long time," he said with a warm smile. "Father-in-law." Sean stepped back in surprise. This man was, in fact, my father. His appearance was far from ordinary, and Sean had always been intimidated by my family. We didn't have a wedding ceremony, only a meeting between the families, and since then, my father and my mother-in-law had not met. At the meeting, my mother-in-law and Sean were so intimidated by my father's presence that they left hastily without much conversation, and it seemed my mother-in-law did not remember his face. "Father-in-law? Ah, it's been a while." My mother-in-law was sweating profusely. "No, I haven't said anything significant. I just brought over some belongings because I thought I could live in Shelley's shop. I haven't caused trouble for anyone," my mother-in-law explained to my father, while urging the workers to continue. "You intend to live here?" "I can't permit that," my father said sternly. "I own this building. The first floor is rented out as Shelley's aesthetic salon, and my daughter and I have a formal contract as the landlords and business operators. It is not permitted to use this place as a residence. If violated, you will need to vacate immediately." "Shelley, unfortunately, I have just witnessed a violation. According to the contract, you must vacate immediately." My father's gaze was piercing. I, too, can feel the overwhelming authority in his eyes. "I understand. I cannot make any excuses for this violation. We will vacate immediately, I responded. My father nodded heavily and turned his gaze to my mother-in-law and Sean. As you heard, I have just agreed with the tenant to terminate the lease. If you enter here again, I will have to call the police as you are now outsiders. Please leave this place. We will now proceed with the lease termination. Saying that, he led me inside the shop and we closed the shutter in front of my mother-in-law and Sean. My mother-in-law and Sean stood there dazed for a while, but soon I could hear them arguing with the movers. As I listened to the sounds, the movers, needing to rush to their next job, eventually left the belongings on the roadside and departed. Sean, you handle this. For now, bring it to our apartment, my mother-in-law instructed. Sean, following her orders, hurriedly arranged a rental car and began transporting the belongings to our apartment. Watching through a gap in the shutter, I said, "It turned out just as expected. They're heading to our apartment. I'm glad I acted promptly. Thank you, Dad." My father's stern demeanor softened, and he showed a smile. Maybe I went a bit too far. Despite his intimidating appearance, my father is actually a very kind person. He dresses this way due to his fondness for gangster films, but he is usually a friendly local real estate agent. They're sure to be surprised when they arrive at the apartment. My father and I exchanged looks and chuckled quietly to ourselves. In reality, all the furniture and household items from the apartment had already been removed, leaving only Sean's personal belongings behind. After a while, my mother-in-law called, clearly distressed. "What happened?" "The room is empty. Where's the furniture?" Her voice was agitated and angry. I responded calmly and deliberately. "I have terminated the apartment lease. I was the leaseholder, and I made the payments, so it was within my rights to cancel it without any issue. The apartment is owned by my father, and we plan to dispose of any remaining belongings as abandoned property and change the locks soon. If you don't collect the personal items quickly, you'll have to meet my father again." Her voice trembled upon hearing my father's name. "So, what? Where have you moved to?" "Let us come there, won't you let us stay with you?" I answered with a snort. "I have just decided to divorce Sean, and we will not live together anymore. I recently told Sean that if you interfere with my shop, I would seek a divorce." He agreed, and I have kept his response as evidence. Due to the influence of you and Sean, I can no longer continue my aesthetic business in this building. Therefore, based on the agreement with Sean, I am proceeding with the divorce. As for the furniture, it belonged to me since before our marriage, and it is only natural that I take it all. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law began yelling at Sean, who was next to her. "How can you so easily agree to such a serious decision as divorce? The situation obviously required appropriate handling." I could hear Sean exclaim in surprise, "Eek! You should not prolong this issue and look for a new place to live," instead I told them before ending the call. Afterward, my mother-in-law and Sean struggled to find a new home and eventually had to rent a house from distant relatives. Sean's commute became difficult, and he quit his job to work part-time at a rural deli while scrambling to pay off his mother's debts. Meanwhile, I was able to move into a property owned by my father immediately. As for the termination of the aesthetic shop's lease, it was actually part of a ploy, and in reality, the business continues to operate as before. Now, the popularity of my aesthetic shop has grown significantly, and it's become so sought after that reservations are difficult to secure, even attracting celebrities. We warmly welcome male clients, and I regularly provide various beauty treatments for my father. Although he is nearing 70, the regular care at our shop has rejuvenated his skin, making him feel a bit closer to the actor he has always admired. Through these experiences, I've come to realize again that the essence of my job is to give each client confidence. The memory of my first free aesthetic treatment when I was in high school remains vividly with me. The excitement and fresh feelings from that day continue to inspire my daily work. That experience taught me what I should offer through my interactions with many customers. I also think about Sean occasionally. If he had more self-confidence, perhaps a different future could have been possible for him. Despite being so close to me, it was difficult to provide him with the right support. His situation has taught me how challenging it can be to offer objective help due to closeness. If, in the future, Sean visits our aesthetic shop, I plan to interact with him impartially and spare no effort in supporting him to maximize his potential confidence. If I can give him the courage to take a new step forward, I believe it would be profoundly meaningful